Welcome to my session. My name is Zanca Copaescu, and I'm the CEO and founder of Strategic and Pharma. It's odd to be at Scope, I guess, this February, and see the empty chairs instead of a full room, and that's how it used to be. But I thank the brave who are here today. And joining me for the next half an hour. So I'm gonna get started by just trying to give you a perspective on the challenges that we are facing in clinical business operations. If you look at the two verticals right here, I think these are all well to familiar activities. Clinical trial operations, we have many experts at the event at Scope, and equally clinical business operations people. Both of us are quite quite important things. Whether in startup mode on the operations side, designing the protocol, getting the study started, and on the business operations side, equally important, trying to plan a study, get it outsourced, do all the due diligence around different RFPs and service providers, and then later on during the execution, tracking the activity on the study and the vendor performance. But somewhat the clinical business operations have been the underdogs of the industry. And I say that because if you look at the level of investment between the clinical operations side and clinical business side, less than 1% of the total technology spend has gone into business operations, which means that heads of clinical outsourcing and strategic vendor managers and clinical trial planners and forecasters are doing their job largely in Excel, as we just heard Jennifer today. Their job is not getting any easier because the trials are getting increasingly more complex. The highly important area of clinical business operations has been largely underserved, yet it represents about $4 billion worth of business. So if you take the next step and look at service provider management, which is such an important topic in the industry, what we are trying to achieve is a better understanding of the risk level of a specific service provider. Whether you are looking at the service provider in ways in which you can mitigate the risks better around the service provider, or whether you want to have a more comprehensive view of their performance. But identifying that risk score is absolutely non-trivial because it involves looking at many aspects of running clinical business operations. To start with, it's having a good understanding of the financial standing of that service provider. Then having an excellent understanding of their contract and bidding history. And you want to know that evolution from bid number 1 to change order number 7 and have that continuity and transparency into a particular vendor bidding history. And then, of course, you want to be on top of their performance, and performance resides in so many systems. In fact, most of the performance metrics reside in CRO systems at the study level. So it's very hard as a sponsor to have a quick temperature check and view on a performance of any given vendor because the performance data might not even reside with you. And further, if you're looking at the quality aspects, the quality has really so many nuances, but let's think of quality from a qualification perspective, a new vendor qualification perspective. With so many mergers in our industry, look at how many activities a certain CRO does, anything from clinical operations to imaging, to technology, to home nursing, and they're growing more and more and more. And at the end of the day, it's not easy to qualify a provider at the service level, not as an entity. So looking at all of these aspects, we need to dig into several places. Budget due diligence, absolutely key. Understanding bid volume and win rate. Understanding performance KPIs. And looking at governing based on the risk level and the volume of business. So we talked about this not being easy and not being trivial. And these are some of the reasons why. To start with, many departments within a sponsor organization own different pieces of information around vendor management. The information that leads us to managing vendors, it's also residing in different systems, so it's not easy to grasp. There are way too many owners involved. And I think we all had, or whomever had the experience of running through a governance meeting knows that there are so many metrics and so many aspects that have to be manually collected. And it's not that the sponsors do not have the data. You do have it. You just don't have it within easy grasp. And it's not easy to manage. It's not at your fingertips, and it's not quickly leading to decision making. So when you look at this picture, the question is, what are we doing as an industry to move from the status quo, to move from the frustration of owning information but not being able to access it easily? And what do we do to change that paradigm? So I like this, I like this quote of the high cost of doing nothing. And the high cost of doing nothing means the high cost of accepting the status quo, the high cost of continuing to work the same way as we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, not investing enough in technology that could stream the acquisition of the information, not investing enough in intelligence, not investing enough in ways in which we can extract intelligence out of our historical data. And that has serious consequences. CRO oversight challenges. There is not a meeting that I go to in which a sponsor does not complain about the CRO, one way or another. However deeply married they are, however deep their relationship is, there is always an eternal frustration. And partly it comes from the lack of transparency in collaboration between the two parties. Weak financial controls and budget overruns. I challenge you to ask a sponsor company if they know exactly how much book of business they have with their #1 strategic partner. They will give you an answer which is approximately, and then it will take an army of people to get the detail of what that number may be. And that due diligence that runs from the initial bid to the multiple versions of a bid, to further along to multiple versions of a change order and going back like any other industry does, comparing actuals with plan. It's not an easy thing to do in pharma. Costly study delays. I mean, we heard many speakers today talking about the delays caused by negotiating with sites, negotiating with CROs, working in a suboptimal manner, being unable to scale up infrastructure because of the tools we use are so antiquated. And of course, vendor management is now in the high attention of all regulators. It goes beyond best practices. It goes beyond internal SOPs, and it goes to compliance against guidelines. So Clinical Maestro, it's the tool I started 3 years ago with a very simple vision. And the vision was there is a deep pain point in all of the different aspects of running business operation. We don't want to be the underdogs. I'm a former clinical business operation person. I didn't want to work in Excel. And I wanted to be able to seamlessly go from a clinical study plan to a budget. I wanted to outsource in another tool than a generic tool that's not fit for purpose. I wanted to be able to lead the way in forecasting using technology. And now with Vision, which is our newest application, we plan to launch it next year, but we are already working on the development of Vision. We want to bring all of those dots together. We want to bring not only the technology to optimize performance, but also the data that enables decision-making to the hands of clinical business operation experts. Suffice to say, Clinical Maestro was created by passionate people like me that have felt the pain themselves, that are rejecting the status quo, and that are believers that as much as technology has penetrated successfully on the clinical operations side, it can equally be successful on the clinical business side. So this is the vision of Clinical Maestro. And behind what the 4 buckets that you've seen here are one or multiple clinical business operations departments, depending on how each company is organized. We want to be able to plan, and planning is very important because the way you plan is the way you are going to source, and the way you are going to source is the way you are going to ultimately execute on your protocol. And planning is non-trivial. Planning involves not only the operational aspects, the cost aspects, includes adaptability to more complex study designs, includes different nuances, like we had the fireside chat around decentralized clinical trials. And most of all, we want to be able to do easy impact analysis. This is such a frustrating element because as decision makers, we do need to be able to run what-if scenarios, not on doing another Excel spreadsheet or not at the very high level, at the detailed level, and we want to do it within minutes because sometimes that's all you need before you go into another management meeting. Now, the bidding is such a fascinating area. I'm an outsourcing professional who, for years, created Excel-based RFPs and Word documents, which even in a strategic partner model, we would still get back as many attachments from the CV to the budget to the answering of the questions. And each of that entity, if I may call it that, would go into some kind of a shared drive and would be at the mercy of whomever had courage years later to open it and drive any insights from it. So bidding is at the heart of Clinical Maestro. We have evolved in our technology approach. We can outsource pretty much for any kind of service provider, soup to nuts, from the RFP creation to the various versions of bidding through the various nuances versus, for example, looking at the resources allocated to each task or looking at the effort required to perform a certain activity. And at the end of the day, outsourcing process improvement is a nice to have, but what is a must have is being in control of the analytics that drive outsourcing. It goes back to connecting the dots, it goes back to owning the data, and pharmaceutical companies sit on thousands and thousands of bids that are not possible to analyze, they're not possible to trend, and that make the oversight of the service providers extremely challenging. And finally, once you sign the contract and you are past the bidding process, it's all about managing a contract through its various changes of scope, through performance, and ultimately overseeing the service providers, not only at the study level or at the therapeutic area level, but at the portfolio level. So you can truly get an insight from the beginning to the end on your outsourcing journey. So Vision is truly a visionary product because it encompasses all of the key elements of conducting vendor management for clinical trials. So it starts by having a vendor database, but not that vendor databases exist in a gazillion other applications. But having a vendor database that is fit for purpose for running clinical trial operations. That means category management, capabilities data bank, advanced search engine, document library. We are changing the paradigm between the sponsor and provider because the service providers come into the system and they are responsible for maintaining their own profile. And at the end of the day, you want to answer a very simple question when you go into a vendor database and you want to know where is CRO X, how is CRO X working with our entity? By business unit, by study, by therapeutic area, by geography. And this is not an easy question to answer. Going beyond into risk scoring, the risk scoring is all about defining your own metrics criteria. You can only score and you can only assess risk if you define your own parameters. And this involves different aspects of the governance because the risk scoring is dictated by your needs and by decision enabling metrics. I think we've all seen hundreds of KPIs, but how many of them are really leading to a true risk evaluation? And the qualification is a very important aspect that has to be part of the overall ecosystem of vendor management. And it has to do with targeted qualification, particularly, as I mentioned before, in the world of continuous mergers and acquisitions on the service provider side. So what are we trying to achieve? It all looks good when you talk about functionality, but at the end of the day, we want to talk about the benefits. The benefits of technology in general are tremendous, and there are so many success stories in the industry. Particularly when it relates to clinical business operation, an area in which technology has hardly penetrated. There is quite significant return on investment that can be achieved on different key elements, such as reducing cycle time. We are measuring more than 25% reduction in the cycle time during the study startup process by being able to expedite the due diligence process in outsourcing and by being able to plan better, which leads to faster study startup. If you are looking at the manual effort, it's over 75% because the effort that you spend managing spreadsheets and Word documents or homegrown solutions goes away. And that's the power of the enabling technology. And at the end of the day, we want to save on the total study cost. And of course, we can only make that claim on the outsourced side of clinical trials, not the internal costs. But there are elements of internal cost as well, because technology enables your own workforce scalability at a completely different level. You can do more activities with less people or with the same people and empower them to not only drive the analytics, but also to get more job satisfaction, which ultimately contributes to retention. So some other ways of measuring ROI at a more detailed level. For example, during the setup process, the time to develop a budget, it's drastically reduced. Actually, one of our customers is jokingly saying that the time to plan and budget a study has gone from weeks to 12 minutes. Quality, of course, that's reflected in accuracy. The more we source, the more data we have, the more it goes back into more accurate planning. The same with the execution, the time spent in evaluating change orders and doing due diligence and vendor performance management is drastically reduced. During the closeout phase, we are looking at efficiency in staff utilization, and we are looking ultimately of what I spoke about before, a substantial reduction in the total study cost. So I'm going to go back because I'm towards the end. At the end, what we are trying to achieve, it's a more integrated and sustainable way to manage clinical trials. and that is represented by Harmony in Delivery. There are so many parties involved in vendor management, in clinical trial planning, in clinical outsourcing, in clinical modeling, in forecasting, and these parties are either in project management, in clinical operations, in strategic vendor management, in quality, and all of them operate with their own processes and in a highly disconnected manner because they use no systems or different systems. So the ultimate attempt of Clinical Maestro is to bring the sponsor side together, but not only the sponsor side, and this is really my ending slide, it's a CRO side as well. We started on the green side with portfolio, source, lead, and vision, which are all applications for the CRO, for the sponsor. But we are developing applications for the CRO as well. In fact, in September, we launched CORE, which is the very first fit-for-purpose SaaS solution for clinical trial costing. And we all know the same problems that the sponsors have in modeling clinical studies, the CROs have as well. And from small to large, they are all operating in Excel, which means many times a simple error in a macro or a link can cause a deviation, substantial deviation in the budget that you are receiving and you are trying to conduct due diligence on as a sponsor. So what will this do at the end of the day is our vision that bringing the sponsor and CROs together, it's going to benefit the industry as a whole, as well as bringing more standardization in core processes in clinical business operations, be them planning, outsourcing, or vendor management. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Anka?
I think change management, how does that fall into what you're trying to do? Are you meeting a lot of resistance from sponsors trying to get them to just do things differently?
So change management from a process perspective?
Yes.
Well, change management is non-trivial regardless, because there is an inherent resistance to stay with the status quo. And then there is an inherent risk of venturing into unknown territory. The best way or path forward in my mind is when you look at technology as a solution as opposed to software. And to bring a solution in place, you must be able to bring the process along. So that requires gap analysis. It requires deep understanding of the current processes, trying to see if there is room for the technology to enable change and for the organization to embrace it. So change management, particularly in pharma, it's not easy. There is high resistance to change in general. But look, what we've been seeing in the last 2 years is kind of a new generation of explorers and pioneers who are willing to run a pilot, learn from it, venture further, and actually change as opposed to wanting things to be custom to their processes. They are willing to change the process to fit the standard. And to me, that's a path forward.
Question?
Hi, I'm Anna Panova from Insight Corporation. Question about the following. So you kind of sit on lots of benchmarking on the trial costs. Would you comment, please, how wide is the distribution of these costs? I am working on the cost side, obviously. So is it like within 20% of each other, different CROs, within 50%? Like how wide is the distribution? And, well, any thoughts on this going forward? Is it becoming basically like commodity, or it's still craftsy CRO work on how to organize your trials? Like, and that's why there's lots of costs and Cadillac to Hondas and also on. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had a very nice chat during the fireside chat about that, and I'll tell you the following. At the rate level, there is high degree of uniformity between the CROs because ultimately the rate is driven by salaries. Salaries have gone up in general in the industry, but the CROs are not making a huge margin. They're publicly traded organization. We know they make 30–40%. So the rates are reflecting that gross margin. Where we are seeing the variance is in the effort allocated to perform a given task, the allocation of resources in a particular country, and quite honestly, the mergers between the CROs have caused a lot of costing issues and legacy costing tools, and we know many have 3, 4, 5 costing tools operating at the same time. So I want to put that focus on the effort because it's really important. If you isolate the rate cards and if you know that you are going to pay, I'm making it up, $300 for project manager, the question is, where is the project manager located, and does it make sense for the project manager to be in Russia when we are running a US study? No, so that's going to drive the cost. And then how many other resources come along in that project manager? And so if you look down at the resources, you are going to see anywhere from 10 to, I don't know, I mean, I've seen 2 resources allocated, but the CROs are overloading the effort for particularly things that should not be causing so much variance. So I think if we, in outsourcing, we zoom in the effort and resource allocation. And of course, you don't want to have all junior people because they cost less. So there are many reasons why clinical studies should cost more, depending on their complexity. But to answer your quick question, no, I don't see any consistency. And if anything, we are seeing much bigger swings than ever before because the industry is still trying to adapt to this new way of running trials. And I don't think that there is a set recipe yet, so expect more volatility. But if you can look under the hood and see the effort, not the rate, I believe that's what's causing the differences.
Thank you. We also have a question through Pathable. Is it reasonable to seek site perspective to learn about CRO performance?
Site perspective on the CRO performance, I think these two camps don't look into each other cost structure. However, the sites could be using the same methodology as the CROs to build their own cost structure. For that matter, I don't see any difference between a site performing a gazillion activities during the execution of a trial than a CRO. At the end of the day, we are talking about tasks. The tasks have resources allocated to it. The resources are costed using rates. It is activity-based budgeting, which the CROs are the masters at, and the sites are yet to learn. So I don't know if I answered that question correctly, but that's my perspective.